Welcome to the pod where the ideas are as sharp as gator's teeth and the conversations are deep. I'm your host, Vincent Solis, and today we'll be navigating the waters of knowledge, so get ready to sink your teeth into today's episodes, which is going to be about leadership on campus for our faculty assembly and our staff assembly. Ladies, welcome to the podcast. Really excited to have you here. So we'll start off with doing some intros. Today we have Miss Cassandra Zamoralez and Miss Rebecca Goins. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Are you guys excited to be here?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
I'm not certain how exciting this content will be, but
It's going to be enthralling.
A new opportunity for sure.
Well, I wanted to talk about the assemblies, right? We have a new assembly on the staff side, and the faculty assembly has been on campus a long time.
For a million years.
Million years. And for those of you in the viewing audience, our assemblies are the designated voice groups for staff and faculty at the college. So we get to work with them on things like policies, anything that impacts either faculty and or staff. So it's a part of the shared and participatory governance structure that we have at the college. So I'm glad to have the reps and the leadership from these organizations to talk about all things related to BC. So I'm going to start with a very general question. What motivated you to step into the role of leadership at these areas? Obviously, when you step into a leadership role, especially one that's voluntary, you guys are kind of squished in the middle between the administrative side of things and the faculty and staff side of things. Knowing that it's a difficult job, what led you down the path of saying, you know what, that's something that I want to do? Cassandra, I'll start with you.
Okay, so I'm certain that this is not the kind of response that you would expect. But what motivated me was the fact that other people believed in me.
Gotcha.
I was nominated. I was hesitant to accept the nomination, but then I was elected into the role, which told me that people wanted me there.
Right.
My colleagues, my peers want me there. They believe in me and my ability to do something.
What was the hesitancy? I know it's difficult to step into a role like this. You got a million other things going on. Was it the time commitment or just the volume of work that comes with it?
I think all that you mentioned. I never really saw myself in this sort of role. I am honestly quite content in my role as a faculty member, and I like the flexibility and autonomy that I have. So I was going to lose some of that.
Yeah. And
I had also truthfully seen some of the tricky situations that other leaders had put themselves in.
Oh yeah.
And
happens all the time.
Yeah, it happens. And so I was just hesitant. I was worried. I know that I have a big mouth, right? And I worry sometimes that my big mouth will get me in trouble. But at the same time, probably it's that big mouth, that confidence in speaking up, that ability to do that got me elected to this role.
Very cool. What about you, Rebecca? What was the driving force? Because yours is a little bit unique in that you took on the charge of starting the role, right? Because it's new. It's not like the faculty assembly's been around a long time. This is kind of a new venture. You're trying to gain your footings, figure things out, in addition to also stepping into the leadership role. What was the inspiration for it? What drove you to it?
I'm invested in this school. In some form of fashion, the school has always been a part of my life, whether my dad went to school here, he was able to get his career here, family going to school here, working here. And I just seen a lot of changes, and there was not a place to take those thoughts and ideas to. And I had heard a lot of complaints. Well, I'm a solution-focused person. So if we can complain, that's going to happen. But let's have a solution.
Yes.
And to me, this was the solution that we needed at this time.
Very good. So how do you guys define leadership? You had to define it. What is it like, Rebecca?
Leadership is just it's a good question. There's so many thoughts that just run through my head. Being there for your people, being the example, striving for excellence, making sure that you are you support your people. Strong, but adaptable, willing to listen, and not taking all the credit for oneself.
Gotcha. Very important. What about you, Cassandra?
I think I'll take a slightly different approach to answering this question, not necessarily what leadership is, but what a faculty assembly president should be.
Okay.
And I think that a leader for faculty should be an effective communicator and an effective liaison. I think that we need to be able to communicate as calmly as possible all of the complaints, like Rebecca mentioned, and there are lots
Good
of
things that you never get.
lots of them.
Yeah.
So just effectively communicate and speak on behalf of faculty, and also fight for faculty if needed. Right. So I think just being able to be that person who can do that, who is confident and comfortable doing that.
The advocacy. Sure. Absolutely. So let me ask this question. What do you find most rewarding about the job? Or the role, not necessarily the job, but the role of what you do?
I think what's rewarding is the thanks that I get. You know, a lot of people call this a thankless job, but I do literally get thanks. I get thank you emails, thanks for this, thanks for that. And so that really does motivate me to keep going, to keep doing what I'm doing.
Excellent. What about you, Rebecca?
Same thing. The things I'm getting, a lot of people don't want to put themselves out there, and they see me as being the person to do it.
Sure.
And also the people that I've been able to work with, that there's no other initiatives or collaboration on campus where I would be able to work with them. So my committee group is amazing, and I've really enjoyed my time with them.
How do you guys manage the demands of being in a leadership role and the demands that you have in your jobs? You both have, full-time gigs. You got other lives outside of work. How do you manage this additional layer of responsibility, time commitment, work effort? How do you guys manage all those things?
I'll be honest, it was difficult for me initially. When I first started the role in June, it was taking over my life. I was up at 2 a.m. doing work or just thinking about things, stressing about things. And what worked for me is what works for me just in my life is compartmentalizing, separating. I have spaces in my calendar now that are devoted to faculty assembly. So I have a faculty assembly office hour. This is a time for meetings. This is a time to work on X, Y, or Z. And so that has worked really well for me, and just making sure that I'm separating the different pieces of work and separating my life as well.
Having the organizational acumen, right? To just kind of, I think that makes a lot of sense, because the rest of it still continues to go, right? You still got students coming by. You still got every other thing that happens on campus related to your job. So what about you, Rebecca? How do you manage?
I'm just one of those where I just move forward, working on the organizational skills, but it's just being able to talk to people and bringing them in. And so when their ideas or stuff, being able to give responsibilities to other people too. So
that is something I struggle with, delegating.
Why is it a struggle? Why do you guys,
I think I suffer from that group work mentality, right, from high school, where it was, if you want it done
so
right.
So much on the line. And
right. If you want it done right, you have to do it yourself. And so I just still really struggle, but trust goes both ways, right? So people trust me. I need to trust them as well.
That's a really important piece. And, none of us can do it by ourselves, right? We either have a team of colleagues or other individuals that are helping on the team put together the pieces of the puzzle, right? So it's not something that anyone can do alone. And that's why there's leadership, because you're working with a lot of people, a lot of unique perspectives on things. And higher ed is in a very, fast-moving change environment that is, to say it's dynamic is an understatement. You talk to folks in different parts of the world when you're at conferences, and it's amazing that everybody's dealing with the same issues, the same challenges. How do you get from point? So it's not just, I think, the amount of change, it's the speed of the change that is adding this really complicated layer to everything that is happening in higher in academia. And I think the other thing that we're really kind of working through is, nationally, higher education has now become politicized, good or bad. But anytime that something gets politicized, it never gets unpoliticized, right? So it's one of these things that's, you hear about it on the news, it's in the election, So navigating all these pieces is really important. So my question in those spaces is, how do you guys work with a team of individuals in terms of you're working with highly educated, very smart, very bright individuals, and we're really fortunate to have those kind of colleagues on campus. How do you guys work through that process with a group of really smart individuals, both of you?
And very opinionated.
Oh yeah, that comes with it, right? Because
Oh yeah.
part of the piece in higher ed is, and it's really interesting because if you're a faculty member or a staff member, the person who knows most about that job is the person who's in that role, right? But when you're an administrator, it's kind of like everybody's an administrator, right? Everybody can do enrollment, everybody can do marketing, everybody can do any number of jobs. But being in a specific job like teaching math, or in your case, teaching psychology, or working in the math center, you have to have a very specific skill set to do those kinds of jobs. So how do you navigate that with your colleagues?
So it's been interesting. I feel like I've put one foot in the water of admin now in this role, right? And so when somebody comes to me with a complaint or a question or an issue, I feel like my brain goes in two directions where I see you,
Sure.
right? On the faculty side, I see you, I understand you, but,
Yeah.
right? There's this other side.
Yeah.
There's this admin side. And so I'm now better able to understand that admin side that faculty maybe aren't privy to.
Well, and I think part of it, and you bring up a really good point, I think a big piece to the participatory governance kind of structures that's common in higher education, you have an individual who will come to, in this case, staff or faculty and say, hey, I've got an issue with A, B, or C, whatever that is, whether it's a complaint or I may not like this change or whatever it is. The vast majority of the times, the individuals look at it in terms of how it impacts their ethos, right? And that's fair. That we are all human beings, and
It's human nature.
It's human nature to view it from that perspective. But to your point, when you kind of have a sense for, okay, well, we understand the human side of it and how it impacts this individual here, but then you got to balance out the institution, rules, regulations, what happens in the community, tax dollars, accountability. Accountability has become a huge thing on the state and national scene for higher education. So you got to balance all those factors. So now that you've experienced that on both ends, what's the thoughts on that in terms of admin life?
It's tricky. Like I said, I can recall in my last executive council meeting, I say, well, I hate to sound admin-y, but let me put on my admin hat for a second and just play devil's advocate, right? Like just explain this other side of the issue. And so that's been challenging. And at the same time, in speaking to admin, it's been challenging to sound as though I'm not speaking for myself, because I am a faculty member,
absolutely.
right? And so is it Cassandra speaking as Cassandra as faculty member, or is she speaking as faculty assembly president, bringing forth the complaints, issues, whatever of other people? And so I find that I have to make that very clear. Like, wait, okay. I agree with you, but right, these other people. So that's been tricky.
Well, and that's part of the challenge, right? If it was easy, anybody would do it. So a lot of people don't like to step into the roles because they can get really complicated, particularly when you have what's unique about the kind of setting that you're both in, that you're also dealing not just with colleagues, but with friends, right? So it's kind of like, well, Rebecca, you have to side with me on this because we've been friends for 50 years, right? And the reality is that sometimes there are solutions, and sometimes there are solutions that they may not be in line with, right? They're like, well, I don't agree with it. And that's okay. Part of what I think has been diluted over the last probably 10 years is that it used to be our job as educators to threaten each other intellectually, right? Okay, well, what is it that we aspire to? How do we get to that place where there's either that commonality or that exchange of ideas, right? Because that's what smart people do. They sit down and they have these discussions about anything, right? That has become harder and harder to do, because if you even use a word like that, you're like, wait a second, we're not supposed to threaten anybody in any way, form, or shape, including intellectually. So there's been this shift over the years that I think has made the discussions about difficult things more complicated, right? So both of you in your roles, that I think adds that additional layer. It's not just the time commitments, it's the balancing of the job, it's trying to be all things to all people. It can get there, but to my next question on this, how important is it to have a voice at the table where decisions are being made?
I think it's pretty important. That goes along with employee morale.
Yeah.
When you're not heard, when decisions are being made from up here and you're down here, and it affects you. Say processes are broken
Sure.
or inefficient, and then policies are made. How are you supposed to
What's
fix
the
them?
impact? Yeah. Yeah.
And so being able to have a space to say, hey, these are the issues, and maybe we can come up with solutions. Let's collaborate. Let's get together and fix these.
Yeah.
Because I know being in the Math Center, I was talking about, I think I'm kind of lucky in the fact that I've already kind of been in a role where, I deal with, I'm kind of admin, right? With my tutors, right? I know what it's like to be a tutor, but I know what it's like to be admin. Now I'm just doing it on a larger scale. And so I'm not in the tutoring room all the time. So I can't see all the issues that's happening. So I need to be told by the tutors what's going on.
What are the pieces?
And so where are the pieces? Are there processes that are broken? Do we need to work on these? How do we make things better? Because our ultimate vision is to be there for students and to make them successful.
Yeah. So one of the things that's unique about the setup that we have at the college is the assembly model versus a Senate model. We've talked about this. Senate, typically you have representatives of the body at large. That you find that at larger institutions where, we still have a relatively small college. So the assembly piece, and for the viewing audience, what that means is that everybody in either the staff assembly or the faculty assembly has a voice and a vote. So it's not a unique structure, but it's an important one at smaller institutions versus at larger institutions where you have thousands of employees. They elect representatives for those areas, and those bodies carry those items forward. So how do you guys get involvement? So one of the things that you talked about, you touched base on this briefly, is kind of the group piece. When you're working on something, there's a project that needs to be done. It's typically, the same 3, 4, 5 individuals that are working on items. How do you navigate past that to get more involvement from either the staff or the faculty?
That's a good question. I think having the right people in place too, people that other employees trust and see on campus and see them involved, and seeing if it's making a difference. If they see the impact that's having and the good impacts, they're willing to get more involved in it.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the difference between an assembly and a Senate, and I think that our executive council sort of mirrors what a faculty senate is. We have a representative from each division serve on executive council, and those meetings are more frequent, and we have more detailed discussion in there.
How often do you guys meet, Cassandra?
Every month.
Once a month?
Every month, yes. Whereas the assembly meets only 4 times a year.
Each of the long sessions and summer.
Yes.
Do you guys meet at all in the summer?
Not at all in the summer, but the executive council does.
Yes, on a regular basis.
Yes. So I really rely on the members of my executive council to help me. So again, not great at delegating yet, but I'm working on it. So I've started to delegate to them, hey, can you help me get some committee members for XYZ that our VP is asking for, right? Or, hey, can you help me put this together? We have started developing subcommittees. So one of the problems, you asked me earlier, what is your hesitation? I think that my introduction to faculty assembly here at Brazosport College ended up being an introduction to a complaint fest. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
The entire hour was just felt like people were complaining, and it felt for a long time like nothing was being done. Until recent years, something shifted. Somebody in a position of leadership was effective, and things changed. And so I am really hoping to continue that where
solution.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of it is that we have to keep in mind the human factor to it. You're going to have complaints about any number of things, particularly in higher ed. One of the things that I find unique about higher ed in terms of explaining to outsiders who are not within higher ed is that higher ed is built from the ground up to resist change. If you think about how we even do things, there's participatory governance, we have town hall meetings, we have leadership council, president's advisory council, we have staff assembly, faculty assembly, we have chairs meetings, directors. So there's a lot of the discussions that happens in these areas, whereas in business, the world of business, it's kind of, okay, we're going to do A, B, and C, and there are other means by which to gather the collective voice of the organization. But I think that for the purposes of resistance to change, it becomes that complaint, and it's not unique to here. It's kind of how the groups work.
Right.
But I think that through the process that's there is coming up with, okay, well, what are the issues? And identifying and sifting through, okay, what are the things that we don't like versus the things that, okay, we understand we don't like them, but there's got to be some kind of a solution that is better than the one that we have, especially, like I said, in this time of rapid change. You talk to other presidents. One of the things that I find really unique is that you see more and more leadership stepping into roles at colleges, and I'm not sure about universities, but colleges for sure, that don't have a traditional background in the areas, right? So you're getting a lot of different perspectives because you're seeing more and more people ascend to leadership roles that may either have not been in the system a super long time or maybe didn't come from the academic ranks. It's just in the way that higher ed has changed, so too how leaders are selected, not just at the president level, but VP level. I think that there are spaces like enrollment and student success that people with highly specialized skills have become very valuable to organizations. People with technology skills have become highly, valued in organizations. So it's one of these things where navigating the change piece with the need for that change is always any leader's kind of crucible. You got to kind of navigate those pieces. But I'm glad that you're kind of getting a sense for what it's like to sit in an administrative capacity on both ends and figuring out big problems, because people will come in and say, hey, well, you know what? I'm not in agreement with A, B, or C. And sometimes A, B, and C doesn't have a solution that is amenable there, but it has to be done for the larger organization. It always kind of gets into the individual versus the organization, right? But that's what discussions are for, and that's what smart people leading the groups are for, and that's where coming together and having those voices is really important. Let me ask this question: how do you guys work through conflict, right? So, and conflict doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, right? Conflict can get disruptive, but there can be conflict on any number of topics. How do you guys manage it from a leadership perspective? Because they're looking to you in both the organizations to kind of navigate those waters.
Voodoo dolls, right?
The what?
Voodoo dolls?
Voodoo dolls?
Everyone
is that what it is?
voodoo
You
dolls,
just
right?
have the voodoo dolls?
No, so I think for me, I approach it in the way that I try to approach my life and just implementing my values, which are openness, honesty, and transparency. And so if something goes wrong, if it's my fault, I'm going to own up to it, right? If admin has said something, I am going to share that with them as long as I have permission to do so. And so just being open and honest helps to resolve that conflict, I think, because it's less of a things are getting thrown on them from seemingly out of nowhere, and more so this is coming from, okay, I understand where this is coming from, right? And so just having that
transparency
is really important
communication
to me.
Yeah, I had one employee was telling me, he says, well, it's interesting. He says, there isn't transparency in how this decision was made. And I said, well, we had these number of discussions. And he said, yeah, but I don't like the outcome. I said, I understand that piece, but you were informed of how this worked, why it worked, what took place. And, after we had a long conversation, he's like, yeah, I said, I get it. He goes, but I still don't like it. I said, I understand. I said, there are some things that we're not going to like. But that's why we have the discussions, right? We have to have the conversation, because at the end of the day, balancing out the decisions that leaders make, whether it's at the Senate level, at a department level, we all deal with it. You all work with people. And I told we were having this discussion with this gentleman. He says, I said, the secret to being a beloved boss is just let people do whatever they're going to want to do. I said, you can't miss. I said, but how effective you're going to be is something different, right? So you got to balance out those pieces to where I always tell folks, get all the wins that you can in the areas that you can get them in, because there are going to be times where you're not going to have a win, and you're just going to have to take the lumps that come with that. So it's all part of that discussion piece, but it's really important. So we talked a little bit about managing the conflict. How do you guys collaborate, Rebecca? How do you bring the group together, more than just the involvement, but how do you guys collaborate on different initiatives?
Just talking, communicating. Some of my favorite times to talk is just in the hallway, and the ideas that come from those.
Yeah.
And just being able to get groups of people together. So, part of the staff assembly is having those committees to where they can have the subgroups and get together and come up with initiatives and ideas and some of the ideas that they've come up with is having a staff assembly newsletter, just to communicate, and a book club, just being able to engage,
to network, to communicate, to build fellowship. Yeah, that's a big piece to it. Absolutely. What about you, Cassandra? How do you guys?
I also am a fan of the hallway conversations.
Yeah.
So we have lots of those where lots of good stuff comes
There
out
is,
of it.
yeah.
But, you don't want it to just be death by meetings.
No,
right?
you don't. You really
and
don't.
you also don't want it to just be emails that are going to get deleted. Yes. So it does become tricky. I think maybe especially on the faculty side with so many different teaching schedules, there's not one time where all faculty are available to meet. And so I have pie in the sky ideas about collaboration. I just don't know, at least at the moment, how feasible those things
Everybody's
are.
busy, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that the voice is really, really important, particularly as we're entering things like SACS accreditation, right? Reaffirmation. That's really important. We're entering our next 5-year strategic plan. These are kind of like these big initiatives that we have to do. Like there isn't well, let's not do it this year. We have to work on our strategic plan. That'll be developed by, hopefully for approval in February. The groups have been working on those areas. But within those, there's lots of different projects that come from the strategic planning process. Like I said, we also have the reaffirmation. And then the big one that we're all really dealing with is House Bill 8, which has to do with our funding from the state. So now instead of how many people we have on campus, we are funded by how many successful people we have on campus in terms of student success accreditation, how many certificates, degrees, awards they're getting. So that has changed our landscape. I think that we've always been really focused on the student success piece, but now it's become laser focused in terms of every department looking at ways of how we can support our students. Let me ask you this. In the work that you do, beyond supporting and advocating staff and faculty, what are some of the things that you do in your roles as leaders on campus to support the student and the goals that the students have for their educational vision?
Well, I work in the Math Center, so we've worked very closely with students. But it's more than just making them successful in math. Of course, we do chemistry and computers and business and the bachelor's program. So there's a lot more classes or courses that we cover, but we're also teaching them those study skills, when it comes to organization, when it comes to creating their schedules, how to effectively use a syllabus. When test taking skills, math anxiety, or just test anxiety, or just anything in general, we're helping them out with. And we're being the role models for them. Okay, when a student comes in, okay, what course are you in? Where are your notes? Let's use that as a resource. Here are some other places that are resources. So we're tutoring them on many different things, not just the content.
Right. What about you work with students?
I work directly with students, but I will say this is tricky for me in my role, because how do you balance the needs of students versus the needs of faculty? Sometimes they're
in conflict,
very much in conflict, right?
Absolutely.
Often, and I would say most of our faculty really do care about students and really do care about student success.
Yeah, we've got some great faculty.
They're very
and staff.
passionate about that, and all of the issues that they bring up come within that lens of doing the best thing for students. But sometimes there are things that, this might be the best thing for students, responding at 11:30 p.m. when they have an 11:59 p.m. deadline. But are you going to force faculty to be available to respond at 11:30 p.m.? That's a probably extreme example, but you know what I mean.
It's the balancing point.
Sometimes things that are good for students might not necessarily be the best thing for work-life balance or just for faculty health overall.
And I think also in some cases for students, because there are sometimes expectations that are probably not going to be met outside of our walls. To your point, I think we've got some faculty and staff that are extremely amenable to meeting with students at different times, meeting with them in their spaces, doing all the things that they can to help ensure the success of the student, which I applaud. We want to do that, to your point. And a lot of folks do. They're very committed to the idea of making sure that all of our students, get across the stage. But there are instances that I think the students, and all of us, we need to understand that outside of academia, there isn't going to be somebody who's going to potentially be doing those things for you, whether it's at a new job or a new venture that they're on. The world operates very differently from the world of higher ed, So we're in a really blessed position. We've got really great support services, really amazing faculty. They can come into your place and get tutoring in math, and the writing center's right next door, and you've got mentors. There's a lot of things that are there. We've got, the food pantry. We've got faculty hours, right? There's a lot of support there, and it can be a really, really good thing, but also, the world beyond our doors doesn't always operate in that way.
How do you balance out them being responsible and independent?
How do you get them the skills that they need to move beyond? Yeah.
That's an interesting point that you bring up. Are you handicapping students by providing so much assistance, maybe because they are going to go out into the real world?
Well, I think it's providing as much assistance as we can, because we want them all to be successful, with the understanding that we also have a responsibility to hardwire the skills that will be needed, whether those are the soft skills or the technical skills. We talk a lot about that, particularly as students are seeking their next employment or advanced employment or a move in career. And we talk about this in our leadership class that you're in, Rebecca. 85% of what is going to happen in terms of your success in your next role is going to be based on your soft skills. 15% will be on the technical skills, right? So how we infuse those into what we teach students and how we advocate for students is really important, because the students that we produce as graduates have to leave our doors not just with technical aspects in psychology or mathematics, both your fields, but it's also about, are we producing well-rounded graduates, right? So that's when you talk to business and industry partners, they're like, yeah, they're really good at whatever technical aspect they need to be good at, right? Because we're doing a really good job teaching. But soft skills is one of those things, or human skills that we refer to them now. Business partners are like, hey, it'd be great if they were doing A, B, and C. So we've done a really good job, I think, in terms of infusing that in the curriculum. But beyond the curriculum, to kind of these interactions that happen in the hallways or in our services, how do you continue to layer on the skills that students will need to be successful beyond our doors?
Right. I'm in the general education core, so we work on those core outcomes like communication skills, critical thinking, teamwork, personal responsibility, right? Yeah. So the challenge now is, how do we get students to understand that they are learning these skills?
Yes.
That they aren't just learning the formulas or the theories, right? But they are also picking up these important skills.
Let me ask this. So you're both in your first year of doing this really important work. How do you self-develop? So beyond leading, beyond doing the work that you have, Rebecca, we'll start with you. How do you self-develop? How do you continue to grow, not only as a leader, but as a person, as someone who's on campus advocating for staff, for students? How do you continue your own growth?
My own growth, I am constantly learning. I'm always going out there and trying to find, ways for training. I'm learning about leadership skills. I'm on LinkedIn. I see all the stuff going on. Sometimes it gets overwhelming, but I'm like, this is some really good information that we just have right at our hands. And so it's a lifetime of learning and taking any of the experiences I've had in the past and maybe didn't go as well as I wanted to, and learning from those and trying to better, if these situations come up again. I will tell you, I've been re-diagnosed with ADHD, so my neurodivergence sometimes gets in the way. So I'm constantly trying to make sure I have the skills and techniques to be a better person and to be a better leader for staff assembly, for my master, for the students on campus.
Absolutely. What about you, man? How do you self-develop?
I think that's a hard question for me to answer, because I don't think that you're going to get a traditional answer from me. I'm not going to say, I seek out conferences, or I read these books. I mean, I read books about psychology, which ends up being self-help all the time. But I think what I do, it might sound weird, but what I do is take care of myself. I carve out time for my physical activity, right? I carve out time for no work, right? Where I'm not going to open my laptop, I'm not going to open my email. So, you know how they say you can't take care of other people until you take care of yourself. So I think that's really the most critical piece for me at this current stage of my life, because I have dealt with some mental health issues, and I think I would call it burnout from just go so strongly, so long my entire life that I am trying to actually take a step back,
balance it out,
and balance.
And it's so important, because part of it is, you know, you'll find people that are drawn into different leadership roles. There's always lots of different reasons, right? This is the person that we need at this time, or this is the person that really loves what they're doing and they get called into it. There are people that aspire to do that. It comes in every flavor of the rainbow. I think what you mentioned in terms of taking care of yourself, regardless of the reason of why someone chooses to step into a leadership role, doing those things is really important. I'm a big believer that anybody who has the difficult task of either making decisions or influencing decisions, or has the pressure of having to make decisions that are going to impact individuals. And it's like anything else. When you make decisions, some people are absolutely going to love it. Some people are going to absolutely hate it. And you got to balance those pieces out. But I do think that people need to have something that quiets the mind, whatever that is, whether it's exercise or whether it's a hobby or reading or going for a walk or, you know, disconnecting. I think that that's really, really important. Having something that allows you to settle down a bit, take that deep breath, and then refocus on the next day, right? It's super critical, because in the roles that you're in, given the amount of people that you are responsible for in terms of the advocacy piece, and part of the challenge of being a leader isn't just all the things that we've talked about, is that you have to balance out 1,000 voices, right? And they all want different things, need different things, have different perspectives. All of those things come with the job. And I think what's important is, how do you balance those out, right? How do you work through all the noise to come up with, you know, effective solutions or approaches to how you work with those items, because it's, you know, it can be taxing mentally. So I think that that's a really important point, is having that. Let me ask you guys this. What about mentors? You know, we all have individuals in our lives that, you know, we can either talk to and or have done the work before, or have a space that, you know, you value their expertise. What role does mentoring play for you guys, either in being a mentor and or having a mentor? Rebecca?
I would not say I've really had a mentor. I've kind of just paved my own road. I mean, I look at people and I pull out different aspects from people, but I'd like to have a mentor. You know, I mean, it's been nice that, you know, I do appreciate the time I've spent with you, you know, this past year. You know, you've mentored me in that way, but like, you know, you were talking about in our leadership, in iLead, about having that mentor, and I haven't felt that I've had someone who has like really taken me on and pulled me under their wing.
You know, I would encourage that. I think that mentoring is so critical. If nothing else, as a sounding board, you'd be amazed at the perspective you get from people that have walked down the path before. That's why I think it's important to connect with colleagues that are in a similar situation, because rest assured, you're not in it by yourselves. And if you talk to, one thing that I think is neat about when you talk to, like, there are organizations that are just for staff assemblies or for faculty assemblies. When you sit down and talk to your counterparts, you're like, okay, well, maybe I'm not going crazy, and you know, we're all dealing with the same things. It happens with me when I'm dealing with, when I'm meeting with other presidents. We're all dealing with very similar challenges. We're all trying to figure out student success in a more intensive manner. We're all working on the enrollment piece. We're all dealing with change management because it's happening so rapidly. And the same is true for your, you know, so I'm a big believer, you know, finding people that can be soundboards, that can help navigate, if nothing else, provide perspective. You're like, you know what, Cassandra, I was a faculty assembly president 5-6 years ago when we were there, we were dealing with A, B, and C. You're like, yeah, we're dealing with this still now. And, it's, I think what's important is that no one comes to the table without value. Everybody brings valuable perspective. And I think that if you can take a little bit from each one in that mentoring perspective, it can be a big help. It really can, because there are folks that have helped navigate that, right? They can help you. And like I said, if nothing else, give you just a little bit of feedback that maybe you're like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense, right? So I would encourage anybody that is, looking to either, like I said, advance their career, do something different in their field, work at being the best teacher they can be, whatever it is. There's somebody that you can learn from in those aspects. I think that there's a lot of information out there, but having that personal connection is really important. What about you? What's your thoughts on mentoring?
I was nervous about this question too, but I don't think that I would say I've had a mentor for this role. So the person who was in this role previously did have a sit down with me and said
a one-time
meeting. One time thing. But one of the things that was valuable, I think, that he said was he suggested that I find someone who would disagree with me.
Yeah.
Right. So that sounding board that you talked about.
It's important, yeah.
Yeah, so, you come up with an idea, take it to that person, the person who's going to disagree with you, so that you can get a different perspective. And I thought that was interesting.
Well, I think it's really important. And it's not necessarily that you have to agree with it. It's just that it gives you that different perspective. Right. You're like, okay, that's what's on the other side. Okay, so then how do we navigate those concerns? How do we approach that? How do we tackle that piece? So, I think that's really important.
Mentoring is tricky, though. It's kind of like adult friendships. Do you just go up to someone and say, hey, do you want to be my friend?
Well,
do you want to be my mentor?
Yes or no?
I will say that there's a couple of different schools of thought on this, right? There are individuals that you can very formally develop that relationship, right? Where you're like, hey, I would like to be my mentor, right? Like it's literally kind of that simple, right? But it doesn't always always work that way. Typically, the way these is, there's somebody that you either admire or respect that has done the job before you. You build a relationship with them, and they kind of fall into that. It's not rarely like the mentors that I have. I've never had a mentor that I'm like, hey, I would like for you to be my mentor. But I have been very purposeful in seeking out people that I respect what they've done, what they've accomplished, or how they tackled an issue. How they approached it, and just learning from that can be extremely helpful. And a mentoring relationship doesn't have to be all the time. It could be you maybe run into that person, or you connect with them once a year, twice a year, and they provide you perspective and a good soundboard. It can be as simple as that. And then others, it can be much more intensive. It can be someone that you have a lifelong relationship with, that you have these valuable discussions with. And I think, to your point, it is really important to get an opposing viewpoint on all things, because the way we have to look at the world isn't singular, right? It's not monolithic. You're going to have a lot of different perspectives, especially the place where people are highly educated, right? Have lots of different opinions, and that's all okay. That's part of the process. That's why we do what we do. So very cool.
So I'm in the process of applying for tenure today, actually.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So tenure for the viewing audience is something unique in academia. And what it is essentially a commitment from the institution to faculty members that have demonstrated a high level of service to college, to our students, for a continued experience at the college. So it's rigorous. They have to go through post-tenure review. I don't even have the authority to grant tenure. That comes from our board. So it's a very detailed process, a very important process in academia. So walk us through that, Cassandra. You've got your application in.
Yes, it's 135 pages long. But within those pages, there's a letter of support from a colleague, in which she mentions that I took her under my wing and mentored her.
Oh,
and I thought that was a surprise, because we never had the, hey, are you my mentor talk.
Yeah.
So, when you said that it doesn't have to be formal, I was just kind of baffled to see that she considered me to be a mentor to her when I didn't even realize that I was being a mentor. But yeah, so the tenure process, like you said, is rigorous. It's meant to be rigorous.
Sure.
For those of us who have been here a million years, like you said, the process is a little bit truncated, but still we're having to put together evidence of teaching excellence, of professional development, and service to the college and community.
Absolutely. And you've been with the campus how long? So 9 years?
12 years.
12 years. So,
12 years.
Yeah, long overdue.
Yeah.
Best of luck with the process.
Thank you.
Very good. I'm going to close out with just a leadership question. Tell me, tell the viewing audience, what's one thing that you are really proud of as an accomplishment in your role? And then the second part to the question is, what do you think has shaped your leadership style to this point? Not necessarily with your role as an assembly leader, but just what's one thing that if you were going to give someone advice about stepping into a role of leadership, what would that be? Like, what's one thing that's shaped your life? Like I said, the other piece to it is, what's something that you're really proud of? Not just in this role, but just in your own journeys in education.
Sure. So again, I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to give you my supervillain background story.
Gotcha. Your origin story.
Yes, my origin story. So I recall, I think I was in the 3rd grade. My mom was teaching me a folklorico dance for the talent show. And so we would go through it. She taught me the steps. And as I was practicing, if I would mess up at any point, I had to start all over again from the beginning. Right? And so that's my origin story, right? I have these really, really high expectations of myself that probably came from my mom in this experience. And so I have these really high expectations of others. I have high expectations of my students, and I have high expectations of my colleagues, my peers. And so it's been interesting to have people maybe not meet those expectations. It's been frustrating sometimes. But that's how I approach it. And I think that, as an educator, having high expectations of students enables them to have high expectations of themselves. Because if nobody expects things of them, they might just skate by doing the bare minimum.
And it's interesting that when you talk to students years after, like, who is your favorite teacher? Which teacher had in college, and who had your most, or even in high school or K-12? So who's the one that had? It's the one that held them, most accountable.
Right.
The one that was sometimes a little bit hard. The one that was rigorous. The one that challenged them.
Right.
Really comes to the ones that at the end of the day, for teaching purposes, is the one that gets someone to think a little bit differently. Right? How do you get them prepared for that next level? And it's through developing these critical thinking skills. And I reflect back on the teachers that I had. The ones that I had that were the most rigorous were the ones that pushed me, that, really brought out the best, that, really got me to a place where I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't think I would have gotten there without having someone push me and drive me and get me there. So the best teachers have the ability to get the best out of you. So that's important.
Right. And to your second question of what I'm proud of, I think I'm proud of moving the assembly from a complaint fest to a body that does something, a body that accomplishes something. Yeah.
And I wouldn't take it too personally, Cassandra. It is not unique to any. It just, people have perspectives. And remember, in the discussions that we've had in the work of the author that we were looking at, is you can't take anything personal, right? Because no one comes to the table with malintent, especially where we work. We work with really great people, but people do have perspectives and ideas and their beliefs, and there's an approach in a system that they have, right? So it's okay for them to say, hey, you know what? I don't agree with this. That's okay. Part of it is, here's why this happened, right? So it's part of that. So I wouldn't. Well,
but also, what can we do about it? Don't just say, I don't agree with this, I don't like this.
That's the challenge.
Give it back to them and
that's
say,
the piece.
What can we do?
Yeah, because sometimes, like I said, there are going to be things that have solutions. And there are things that don't have solutions. I'll give you a great example. Many years ago, when we were dealing with the digitization of libraries, initially, when we saw this happening, there was a lot of folks that were just so resistant to, I like my book, I like it, and I do too. So I'm old school, that's how I was. But you talk to today's students and they all have it. Just look at how we're set up here. You've got, all your iPads, all the technology. The students are in that
seen
space.
The books in my office.
Yeah, no, but as students have transitioned, so too have some of the services. And for some folks that embrace it, they're like, yeah, this is great. And others, like, you know what, it's too much change for me. So it's not that there was an ogre anywhere out there. Look, we got to figure out how to make libraries more digitized. It's just that that's the way the space is headed, right? In a lot of areas, not just here. Online education, years ago, you couldn't even tell a faculty member, hey, let's work on an online. They're like, I will never teach online. I will never do, especially prior to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
After COVID and everybody went online, they're like, I will never go back. This is how I'm going to do it. I'm only going to teach. So it really is. And part of it is that once you go through the change and you get past that initial, okay, the change has happened. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. But once it happens, they're like, okay, let's move on from that. So to your point, whether, people are always going to just, in your role, you're doing the best that you can to support and advocate for faculty. There's a balance, right, between admin and what those demands are for both of you. But just my advice is don't take anything personally. It's somebody who has those. It's okay for them to have those perspectives. That's the spice of life, right? So I'm going to say not to worry about it. That's something different, but don't take it personally. They're like, well, Cassandra, I don't agree with you, and it's okay. That's why we live in a free society. So. Rebecca, what's something that you're really proud of? Not just in what you've done, but just your work.
You're talking about origin story. I have had a lifetime of people not having high expectations of me. And so a lot of times it was just out of spite to
I'm going to show them. I'm going to make it happen.
I want to show them,
yeah.
right? And so that's some of those things have been what I'm proud of. And, being able to create the staff assembly because we needed it.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I'm very proud of that because I know there are plenty of people on this campus and has been over the years that could have done this, that were very capable of it, but they didn't do it. And so just those high expectations, and it's just the same thing in my center. We have our 3 levels of certification for tutor training. We have a level of excellence that and expectations to keep it that way and to keep making sure we're using the best practices and providing services that make our students successful. So I'm very proud of just the staff assembly itself.
What about your biggest leadership lesson?
Biggest leadership lesson, trust and just listening to people.
Yeah.
And I really didn't realize that people trusted me. And I am very grateful for that.
Very good. Well, ladies, I wish you the very best in your roles. They're important roles. Continue the work that you're doing with your assemblies. We're fast approaching the end of the fall semester. We are almost into November. The holidays will be here. So to our viewing audience, once again, wanted to just mention the caliber and the quality of the individuals that we have, not just working with our students, but working with our faculty and staff. Very proud of the work that they do to provide advocacy and a voice for innovation and for looking at the future through a different lens that we can all appreciate. So ladies, thank you so much for what you do, and wishing you the very best. I know you guys are going to do really good work and continued success in all that you do.
I wanted to say thank you to my people too. I've had a great committee, and so without them, we wouldn't be where we are.
It's all about the people.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And remember, everybody, in a world full of quicksand, be a gator, strong, adaptable, and always ready for a deep dive. Until next time, keep your teeth sharp and your minds even sharper. Thank you for joining the podcast.